Welcome to the July 18th meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. Call the meeting to order. And tonight we're going to make one change to the agenda. We're going to move item 6, the City Council Joint Session Meeting Minutes, from consent to action.
Move approval of the agenda with that amendment.
Second.
Moved by Essex, second by Franson. Discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Director Rasmussen, would you please read the mission statement?
The mission of the Ames Community Schools is to ensure that all learners develop the knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, and personal esteem necessary to grow in and shape a changing society.
Thank you. I believe we have one person signed up tonight for a public forum. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on the current agenda or not. Those who wish must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speakers' participation is limited to 3 minutes once per board meeting. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board do not necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. We ask speakers to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees or students or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. Karen Stein.
Good evening, everyone. 1,000 to 1,500 students. That's how many students we have struggling with writing and reading out of 5,000 students here in Ames. And that is, should I start the work? You can start the clock. 1,000 to 1,500 students, that's how many students we have struggling reading and mathematics in the district out of 5,000 students, and that's including homeschool children. We, as you know, we met with you, and if I haven't said that before, thank you so much for all your efforts. I know that, Luke, you posted on the newspaper a huge sign for parents to come, and very thankful for doing that. Thank you for your time. I know you all care, even though they're not your personal kids. They are your kids, they're part of the community, so thank you for caring. I'm also very impressed that we're working. The more I learn about Dr. Deborah Reed, she is nationally sought after. She works with many districts all over the nation. And I am relieved that we're working with her because she's gonna keep us competitive. She's gonna help us find the right program. And it's so crucial to find the right program, whatever that is. Not just for the 1,500 students, but for the 5,000 students. Back on May 23rd, we heard from Aaron and Mary that our experts had recommended foundations, words their way in making sense of phonics. My understanding is that I had called the IRRC, Iowa Reading and Research Center, when I found out that Ethan had dyslexia. This was almost exactly a year ago when I talked to them, and I was looking back at my notes, and they walked me through the process, saying, you know, if your district ever did this, and I'm so glad we're working with them, they do an assessment, they talk to the board members, and they also meet with the parents. They have an open forum. So I'm glad that you guys have met with her. I'm assuming you've met with her, and I'm glad that we continue to work with Dr. Deborah Reed. I would love to be able to have a timeline on site to understand where we are in the process. And the reason I'm saying that where we are is because it's a little confusing for me right now. And what's been confusing is that we started with 3 programs that were recommended, as Dr. Ross had mentioned, and Mary and Aaron, by our experts. Then we were down to 2 when the principals met, and they decided that making sense of phonics, it's a great training tool. and that's what they thought it was a great professional training tool. So we should be down to 2 programs now. What I find confusing is that last time we met, Mary and Aaron said, we are going to try to get our hands on every program we possibly can. So it sounds like we're back to square one now. It's no longer just foundations and words are way. And I think I need to understand the reasons why that's happening, because it doesn't seem to fit from what we were told, what our experts told us. The other thing I find confusing is that we're doing our own gap analysis. We have great teachers. We have amazing teachers. And my kids had some of those teachers. And I've had the privilege to volunteer with some of those teachers. And diagnosing our own gaps and assessment is not our area of expertise. That's why we're working with the Iowa Reading Research Center. This is what they do. They do a huge analysis and they tell us where our gaps are. And this is really important because they're going to keep us competitive as far as here in Iowa and nationally. So I guess my question is, why are we diverting from the plan? What is Dr. Deborah Reed saying about going back, I guess, to square one, since we're now doing different programs? We're thinking about that. What is our budget telling us as far as taking more money and more time on programs? And the other thing I did want to stress is how important it is to work with someone like Dr. Deborah Reed. And yes, she is nationally sought after. I was looking, and I think I left a copy a while back with each of the board members. And this was a comparison with schools here in Iowa. Out of 23 schools, we were tied in 7th place from our white graduates, and I'm just reading what it says. Our Hispanics, we were in 5th place. Our black students, we were tied 17th place. According to the department, and this was from the Department of Education, all these results, academics in Iowa, we are under, as far as the average, we're under the Iowa 12th grade reading level and math level in comparison to the nation. So I think this is a great opportunity to reinvent ourselves and work with the experts. So my next question is, when you've talked to Dr. Deborah Reed, I'm assuming the board has done that, what have you gathered, what information, your comfort point with her? You know, why do you feel comfortable working with her? And what have you learned from that? How is that going to help our students? And then the other question I have is, what other consultants are we going to be working with as far as the other subjects? Because literacy is incredibly essential that we get this, and we get it right, and we're competitive, and we make our kids stronger. Because this is going to spill into math, social studies, science, and so on and so on. This is a first step out of many subjects, other steps that we're working on. Who else are we going to be working with in math and so on? What other experts are we looking into partnering with? Can we start that process also with the other consultants, with the other experts in these areas? It just seems that we're letting a lot of time pass by, and I know that Erin and Mary have a lot on their plates, but can we start, if we haven't searched, or if we do have some names, and I'm looking at Dr. Ross hoping that, you know, we have that, what other consultants are we hopefully looking to work with so they could help us with this great opportunity and stay competitive, not just in Iowa, but nationwide. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. All right, I'll close the public forum and go on to our first information item, comprehensive assessment plan. Dan and Dr. Ross.
evening. Is it working?
You're good.
Okay, thanks. Can't tell. I haven't figured out what it sounds like in this room yet. We're happy to inaugurate the little PA system and our projection system this evening. So tonight, Dan and I are here to walk us, the board and the community, through our comprehensive assessment plan overview. And this is something that we do annually. And tonight, we're going to limit ourselves to the comprehensive assessment plan as opposed to as opposed to some of the things that we want to report out later on. There was a Des Moines Register article a few months back that we are actually in the process of preparing, and I had hoped to incorporate that into tonight's remarks. However, because of the scope of the CAP assessments coupled with the scope of the Des Moines Register piece, we're going to separate those into two different meetings just because I think it makes more sense. The other thing it will allow us to do is, because a lot of that was on early childhood, we want to have more time to confer with Brandon at Northwood to make sure that we have his take on some of those elements. So just know that we'll be coming back to that, and the original game plan had to be kind of adjusted based on that. So tonight our outcomes are to provide an overview of our CAP assessments by content area. Last year, for the first time, we actually took each of those data sets and grouped them together right around the content area, which made more sense. And we'll also offer some reflections on our observations about significance of those results. We'll also compare last year's assessments in Iowa, the Iowa assessments, to the previous year, and then discuss a little bit about how those data have influenced programming decisions.
We're going to go ahead and start with reading. And in reading, we have 3 assessments. We have the Iowa assessment, we have FAST assessment, which is, the data you see up there is a K3 projection. It is K5, but it was not last year. So in order to look at comparative data, we kept this year at K3. And then you see the spring benchmarking, which is K5. And then this year we also added a percentage at the bottom of students proficient on at least one. So I went through and looked at all the student ID numbers and matched them up that way. What you'll notice in the Iowa assessment is that we have a slight uptick there in our elementaries. We're now above 90% in our full academic year students. In our FAST, we again saw a little uptake. Now, some of that uptake in FAST might be they readjusted the norms a little bit after year one. The state had to make some adjustments, and so I like to think that's because of what we've been doing in the classroom, but there have been some other adjustments there that could have some significance. And then in our benchmarking, we see a little bit of a decline. We think that in part is due to a tighter alignment in what constitutes a level. We've done some training with our staff on how to iterate reliability along those things, and that in that process we might have been inflating those numbers a little bit in the past. So that's where some of that is. One other point that I want to make is in that FAST data, that includes the state has 3 designations there: appropriately progressing, at risk, and substantially deficient. That FAST marker is both the adequately progressing and the at-risk students. The only ones not included in that are the substantially deficient.
One of the things to note is the DE just notified districts here in the last couple of days that the vocabulary is going to be shifting from substantially deficient to persistently at risk. So you'll hear us starting to shift that vocabulary as well. I think they thought it was maybe a little more gentle with families, and I can't argue with that, because substantially deficient, especially if it's your child, it sounds like a pretty painful letter to get from your child's principal. So noted.
You'll notice also that on at least one of our assessments, we've got 89.64% proficient. That number includes all students in the district. Our Iowa assessment number included only FAY. So when we add back those students who weren't with us all year, that's where those numbers change a little bit.
So Dan had made the suggestion in our conversations in preparation, looking at our CAP data, to start looking at each of the content areas and however many assessments we have in that content area, looking to see how many children or what percentage of our children are proficient in at least one of those markers. And I think that that's kind of an interesting way, especially as we move forward, to look at that, because they all measure slightly different things, and sometimes they're substantially different from one another. So knowing that a student is proficient on FAST versus on benchmarking tells us a little bit different story about how that child is reading. So we're going to continue to look at that, see what kind of trends we see over time.
Our next slide is in light of the state's emphasis on third grade reading. We pulled the third grade out specifically to talk about that a little bit. You'll see the Iowa assessment numbers. We're at 88% proficient in our third grade across the district. That's up about 0.5%, which is probably 1 to 1.5 students. I don't know how you get half a student, but that's the math of it. In FAST, we saw a little bit of a decline, again, possibly due to some of the realignment. And our benchmarking, we saw a decline again also, consistent with what we saw in the elementary. The one note in our FAST data is that that would mean 16% of those students would be in that substantially deficient. That came out to about 48 students who would be the ones we are talking about in terms of retention. Now, that would not include any of the exemptions that Dr. Ross is going to talk about here in a second.
So just as a reminder, the retention rule has been moved to next year, May 1st of 2017. So the exemptions include if a student, for example, attends an intensive summer reading program, that student would be exempt from retention. Limited English proficiency students with less than 2 years in an ESL program, students with IEPs where their IEP indicates that FAST is not an appropriate assessment, or those students who have passed an alternative assessment or portfolio, and some of the students with IEPs will take an alternate assessment of that variety. Finally, if a student has been retained and had intensive assistance for at least 2 years, those students would also be exempted from retention. So if in first and second grade a student had extra assistance and one of those years had been retained, that student would not be retained again in third grade.
At the middle school, in all of our data, we're going to see a little bit of a dip in our middle school numbers. In part, we had a class that went into the middle school with some pretty significant needs, and that's reflected a little bit in our data. And some of it is that we're working with Pam and her staff to drill out and dig into what exactly all of those causes are. I do not believe that's the entirety of what you're seeing in the numbers, but that's at least in part and in play with those numbers. In our Iowa assessments, we slid from 87 to 82%. That's grades 6, 8 combined. And then we give a second assessment at the middle school called the GRADE, Group Reading Assessment and Diagnostic Evaluation. That we saw an increase in our scores, students performing at or above grade level. And that led us to about 87.76% of our students proficient on at least one assessment in reading at the middle school.
So we know that the middle school teachers have started digging into these data. However, it's important to note that with the grade, for example, those are provided to, or those assessments are given at the very end of the year, and so the time from the time that they are assessed till the teachers leave is a pretty short window, and so they'll be coming back and looking at those assessments again just to drill into them and get a little more information. We also know that as part of our teacher leadership and compensation plan that there is part of that plan for the upcoming year is to provide professional development to the middle school and high school literacy teachers, focusing on quality instruction with struggling readers. So we saw a couple meetings ago that we've had quite a bit of success with that at the high school with Sarah Tronas, and we're going to replicate some of that at the middle school for the upcoming year.
At the high school, at the high school. Our Iowa assessment scores went up. What you're looking at there in your Iowa assessment numbers is 11th grade only. That's the year that we've been reporting to the state for No Child Left Behind. So you see that I've included for this year, 9 through 11th grade full academic year compressed data. That's what the state is starting to use as we go to Iowa school report cards, so I wanted you to see that. I like that number better. So that means we've done fairly well across all 3 grades there. When we look at the grade, we're looking at just 9th grade. Last year was the first year they gave the grade in grades 9 through 11 and expanded that work. So for comparative data purposes, we have just the 9th grade in this number, and that's at 78.53%. And then of your 9 through 11th graders proficient on at least one, we're at 87.43%. So when you look at the high school data, it's really hard to get a big picture view because we're looking at different grade levels at all of those different points. And it makes it a little bit tougher to drill into it. But we'll do some more of that at the next time we come to the table.
One of the things that we have been looking at, or considering as we've been looking at our data, includes identifying those teachers who do additional instruction time at both the middle school and high school, identify those who are getting the best results with their students, and then have them model some of their instructional practices. Sarah Tronis would obviously be one of those folks that we'd like to see doing some modeling for staff.
The next slide is a comparative slide between Ames, Heartland AEA, and the state of Iowa. Ames students make up about 3% of Heartland AEA and about 1% of the state of Iowa when we talk population. We're consistently doing better than both our students are outperforming both Heartland and the state. The only other data point that I'm unable to get at this point, and I'm still chasing, is the Story County one where I get all the schools, data from all the schools, and compile that to put a Story County and see how we compare to schools in Story County. And that one I need some help from the AEA to help me get all that data compiled. So,
one of the observations Dan and I made as we were reviewing our data sets was that in the last 10 years or more, one of the observations I've made is that we consistently were scoring solidly in the 80%, regardless of what grade level, what content area. One thing I noticed this time was that we've got a lot more grades that are moving solidly into the 90% area. And I think that that speaks well to what we're doing. I think the board knows that we don't rest on our laurels, but I think it does speak well to what we're doing because those percentages continue to rise. And so we do keep an eye on that longitudinally, and we are, Dan and I talked too about at some point in time we'd like to come back to the board, and I think Dr. Taylor has suggested that we look at 5 or 10 years of what are the trends looking like that way relative to, are we in the 80s, are we in the 90s, and just looking at it more closely over a longer period of time.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
As you're going through some of these slides and comparing Heartland, for our audience and those at home, can you explain geographically what area makes up the Heartland AEA?
Heartland actually reaches, I can roughly, I'm not an expert on that because it's just not within my purview, but Heartland area reaches, I believe, to the north end of Story County, goes out as far as to the east, Newton, I think is the far end there. On the south side, I think probably down to Indianola or so, and on the west side, out to maybe Adel.
no, I know it's part of that.
And there are 56 school districts included in the Heartland area, and it is the largest AEA in the state. So when we're looking at our assessments, we see that, as Dan pointed out, the Ames students continue to outperform both Heartland and the state in all grade levels in reading. And as I mentioned previously also, we continue to have more grade levels moving into the 90% range. On our second assessments, we continue to use our second reading assessment to inform and improve our instruction. Some of that does get reported to the state, but just as a second assessment, we're really not compared to other districts that way because districts are allowed to select what their multiple measure is. But I think that those second measures sometimes are even more important than the Iowa assessment simply because it helps inform our multi-tiered system of support or MTSS process to meet the needs of individual students. And that's why we're continually trying to tighten up our benchmarking so that we're not misidentifying how to actually meet the needs of students in reading. Looking at our data also helps us to identify our areas of professional development in order to help our staff individualize and respond to student needs.
Any questions on reading? Going once, going twice?
Might come back to it.
Okay, there'll be time at the end also.
Thank you.
Yep. The next section is going to be on math. You will notice it has a very similar format. We have multiple measures of math at all grade levels. At the elementary, we have the Iowa assessment again, which is 3-5 full academic year. We have the Envision, which is our textbook series end of the year math test. And we have, those are the only two we have at the elementary level. So that third line is percent of K-5 students proficient on at least one CAP. It's important to note that if you're looking to compare Envision to math tests in the past, our local math assessment, that we have upped the percentage of what proficiency is there. You have to get 80% of the knowledge to be considered proficient now in our second assessment on math. So when you look at that, you see that 76%, that's 76% of our kids have retained 80% or more of the math instruction they had over the course of the year. And naturally, we want that to be higher, but that's a pretty high bar to set for our students. At the middle school, again, we see a little bit of a dipper in our Iowa assessment numbers. We have an end of the year assessment, and this number contains multiple assessments in it, so it's a little bit confusing. Go Math is our math textbook series, and that's given to students in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math. Algebra students and geometry students would take an end of course assessment. Typically, those students were included in our numbers on the 8th grade or 7th grade math tests, or algebra kids took the test at their grade level. We've now transitioned so that they're taking the test in their accelerated level. This is the first year we're giving that, and that is a very scary number when you, relative to all the numbers you're seeing. But we have, again, this was given the last 2 weeks of school, and our teachers have not had a chance to respond to it. And again, we set the proficiency bar there at 80%. And in case of the middle school, that might be a little bit too high. We need to go back and evaluate where we are with that particular assessment. At the high school, again, the layout is the same. The end of course assessment, which is our second assessment at the high school, it does lay out, does include our middle school students because those are high school level courses. So that file comes back with all of those in it. You'll notice in our math Iowa assessment scores, we saw a pretty big jump in our 11th grade students. We saw 92.53% overall at the high school. And then in our GMAT at the high school, we have about 63% proficient. That is only given to non-accelerated students. So students on their grade level are taking that. This next slide, again, is the comparison between Iowa assessment with Ames, Heartland, and the state of Iowa. And again, you'll notice we're performing very well relative to those two groups that we're comparing.
So again, Ames students, as Dan mentioned, outperform Heartland, comparatively speaking, as well as the state. And those second math assessments, were given late enough in the year, so we really need to go back in. But we also don't have the longitudinal data at this point in time because we've changed some of our data collection methodologies. So because these assessments were given at the end of the year, we're going to have to go back into them. One of the things we know, though, is that we have made some significant changes in addressing the needs of individual students through additional instruction time or AI time. And the PLC work unpacking the Common Core has really been significant. A lot of our teachers will report that to us, that really understanding what they're supposed to be teaching and then working in their PLC to address their instructional approach has been a benefit to a lot of our teachers as well. So we'll continue to support those areas as we move forward in our math instruction. Any questions specifically on math? Okay, move on to science.
Now for my favorite subject. Science has only a second assessment at the elementary level, so at grades 6 through 12, you'll only see Iowa assessment data. And really, elementary science data, we would focus on the Iowa assessment, and we saw a little bit of a decline there. In our full academic year, we also see performance on at least one at 82.88%. Our second assessment in science is the local science rubric, and what that is our third grade teachers take their students' performance on the States of Matter unit, and that is reported out as our second assessment is that particular unit. That's all we got there.
Well, the only thing I would add about the local science rubric is that, again, just trying to get that level of inter-rater reliability up is sometimes a challenge. And so that variance, that, about 1% or so difference could just be attributed to the lack of inter-rater reliability. So it may not be actual student performance, but more the teachers assessing are not well collaborating.
And as I said, at the secondary level, we have only Iowa assessment data, and the middle school saw a little bit of a decline, and the high school saw an increase in their performance.
One thing too, just as a reminder, I think the board is probably very well aware of this, but we're always measuring a grade level and we're not following students in our proficiency reporting. And so that's an important detail because some of the fluctuation has to do with a different group of students moving through, and it might even be attributable to the number of students. So they may not be dropping off as much, but a few students here and a few students there from year to year can make a difference in what our scores look like.
In science, again, on the comparative one, we see we have 3 grade levels above 90% in science, and we are consistently at every grade level outperforming Heartland in the state.
Science traditionally in Ames is an area where our students excel, and so this looks a little bit different this year, but some of the reasons that we think our Iowa assessments might have changed some is because, and it's actually on the next slide, but we've been putting a lot of emphasis on reading and math, and so something has to give a little bit, just the way things ebb and flow, and that's part of our theory that our science scores may have slipped just a little bit from what we generally expect to see, but on the flip side of it, we think that those will come back around with the addition of next generation science standards being added and more work on those. I think we're going to see those scores come back up. So it's not terribly concerning, other than it's a trend that's a little bit different than what we traditionally see in science here in Ames. It's also interesting to note that with ESSA, or the replacement for No Child Left Behind, some of the requirements may change, so the number of grade levels used to assess in science might be fluctuating down the road once we know more about ESSA. So just some final thoughts in conclusion. There have been changes in state and federal reporting, both because of No Child Left Behind going away, but also it has implications for Chapter 12, which is our reporting in Iowa code. Those who were here for our School Improvement Advisory Committee, or SIAC committee, in May are going to recognize that those goals are not showing up in front of the board today, because we met in May, and then in June, the Department of Education, the Iowa Department of Education, said Yep, we're not doing those anymore. So we knew something was coming, we didn't know what it was, so we were advised to move forward doing what we always did, and now we'll continue just to monitor those for ourselves. MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support, is such a critical part of working with our students anymore, that these data really help inform what happens with students, as well as common formative assessments provided at the classroom level. So those give us the structure to use multiple data points to respond to student needs. And then, of course, we're seeing a lot of the results that we are because of our PLC process, as well as the job-embedded supports for our teachers and our principals as well, with opportunities to respond to individual student needs in a timely manner. And that's an important part of some of the progress that we see throughout. So at this point in time, that concludes our formal presentation, and we'd be happy to entertain questions.
So Dr. Ross, and this is a very high-level type of question. When you we get all this data, and it's a ton of stuff to try to reflect upon. When get into your mind, can you talk about how you reflect upon the data, and what is success, how we should be applauded by what we're doing, but then also what opportunities are there for improvement, and then how do you strategically go about trying to deploy those?
Well, there are several ways that we look at it. In our department, most of it's at a program evaluation level, so we're not looking at individual students for the most part. That's done at the building and classroom level. So we really look to see our programs responding to the needs of students. We'll start breaking it down and slicing it in a lot of different ways just to really see what's going on. We'll look at it by building. We have the capability of looking at the classroom level, by teacher. But we really want to see what's going on, where it's going on, and then from the C&I standpoint, we respond with professional development. That's a key part of what our role and responsibility is. But then at the building level, that's where instruction takes place. So then at the building level, the principals work with their teachers, the teachers work within their PLCs with each other to really understand how to respond to the student needs. Iowa assessment, I would tell you, are more, again, there's a word I'm looking for.
Autopsy.
Thank you, that's the exact word I'm looking for. So it really doesn't help us inform instruction, but it is part of a pattern. So if we're looking at a student's assessment history and we see that there are red spots all across it in math, then it behooves the staff then to respond. What do we need to support that student in math specifically? So the building level and the classroom level is obviously a much different response than at the district office level. And if you want to probe into that a little bit more.
So I'm just kind of curious of how we then try to best measure, are we being successful as a district? So I love the idea that we're looking at individuals and benchmarking those kids as they make progress. And I think it's great that we applaud those times when kids may only need to make a half of a year growth, if that's what is a good thing for that student. So I'm just trying to think, how do we kind of always evaluate ourselves on, are we making progress? And then can we reflect upon successes? So in the business world, it's a lot easier because it's all financially driven.
Right.
But in this, it's a lot different. So I'm just kind of...
It is much more difficult because, we've had this conversation about what constitutes success. And I would say a year's growth, and we have more capability of looking at growth for a student by year. But, and that's part of the Iowa School Report Card too, is just looking at that growth model. But we know that there's still some areas for growth in the reporting element of that. And so it's not a perfect system yet. I think we need to continue to ask that question, is how do we constitute success? Because it's not a black and white answer. And I know that you're well aware of that as a board, that it's a very complex answer. And I'd hate to oversimplify it to the point where it's a yes or a no because of all the moving parts. It's not just one measure, it's multiple measures over time.
Is there a way we could then say, okay, these are the 3 or 5 or 10 ways that we think best looks at success in our district that we could then flush out? I'm just trying to think of like goals and like say, okay, this is where we want to be.
I think part of that is going to be up to you guys as board members, and I push this to the principals all the time too. As a school district, anytime we're less than 100%, that means one kid wasn't as successful as we want him to be. We also know that 100% is unattainable, that we can't be everything for every child. So then we have to figure out, okay, where's that line of what's acceptable, what's not? And for us to say anything less than 100%, it's not okay. If my son's the one not in that group, that's not okay. So then we start talking about growth, and we start talking about all these other factors. What happens to me as I play with the data and look at it is I sort of in my head say, okay, this is what my first blush would be, whatever I'm talking about. So when we talk MTSS, the magic number is sort of 80%. If your core is meeting the needs of 80% of your students, your core is strong. It's the supplements that you have to start working on. And so I start there, and then I work my way up until I'm comfortable negotiating that. But that's really going to be up to you, to the community, to kind of come up with those positions, the administrative team to say, this is where we set that line of this is good enough, this isn't, sort of piece. And it's going to ebb and flow and move. 10 years ago, it would have been if we were above 85, that was amazing. Now if we're under 90, we're like, oh, we should be doing more. And that's where we've got to try and balance where we are with our kids, what the assessment is measuring, how much time have we dedicated to this, and how much of this whole child are we growing as opposed to just this one aspect of that. So, I wish I had a magic number for you, but there's not.
I'm not looking for that. I just want to know I'd love to get us to a point where we can say this is how we're measuring success in all these different areas. And if things are not working, this is how we're going to try to change our strategy. We'll reflect upon it, we'll see what the results are, and we're going to reevaluate and change. So I think, to Karen's point earlier, I think that type of evaluation would be helpful as a community, as a district, to say this is what we value, and this is how we're going to try to get to that point. Okay. Other questions?
Back on slide 5, going back to the retention conversation. I'm just thinking in general numbers, if it was, in slide 4, I guess relates to that too, if it was 16% of the entire class, we're talking 50-some students.
48, yep.
48, thank you. Okay, so we're talking 48 students. Have we done the breakdown of the numbers on that, on how many of them would actually have an exemption yet? Do we know, I mean, how many have signed up, or how many might have signed up for the intensive summer reading program if that was the choice? How many have already been retained so they wouldn't? So I'm looking for that number of, if we have 48 that are in that 16%, how many would have qualified this year that would be looking at being retained? And I guess it's kind of an unknown, because since the parents didn't have to sign them up for an intensive summer reading program, and I'm sure there are parents that would have signed them up if they would have needed to in order to move their child along.
But we could also look at just how many kids attended summer school in general who would have been on the list.
Yeah, and it's not just signing up, there's an actual, you have to attend X number of
Yes.
percentage, and
Yes.
those things haven't been run yet to tell us where we are with all of those pieces yet. So that's in our plan.
If the state moves forward.
Well, regardless, Dr. Ross will see that, and Dr. Taylor. And from there, we'll decide how to move forward with that data.
Okay. On the comparisons, you talked about the county, getting the breakdown to the county. Is that something that you are going to come up with the information?
I'm trying. The board had asked for that last year. And so that's on my list of, I'm always going to get that for you to try to keep that data point going. But it takes some help from other agencies for me to get that. I don't have just straight access to all of the other school districts' data. Heartland usually has it, and they can generate some information for me, and I haven't been able to compile that just yet.
So if you're able to compile that, that'll be shared out via email to us or via board presentation?
It'll probably,
on a future date?
I'm trying to remember if I put that in the public Tableau visualization last year or not. I believe I did.
Yeah,
So it'll be available for the public through the Tableau server, but we can also send this out with that comparative slide updated.
That'd work, just to let us know that it's added.
Yep, sure.
When the time comes. Go ahead, Liz.
I have a question on,
Lisa.
think it is slide 13 on the high school math proficiency. Yes. So at the end of course assessment there, the Algebra 2, is that Algebra 2? Is it Advanced Algebra 2? Is it who all is included?
It's all of that.
It
It's
is
all
all
of
of the
those. It's
Algebra
also, I'm not sure when it took effect, but now students have to have Algebra 2 to graduate, so it now is going to be testing seniors and those who are requiring to take that Algebra 2. In my head, I'm thinking last year was the first year that that would have happened, and we might not have had very many seniors there, where we're seeing more of that showing up now. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, but it's a compilation of
But-
all Algebra 2.
Yep. Anyone who got credit for Algebra 2 has to take that
It
fight.
is included
Or
in
take
that.
that
And
assessment.
then our math course direction, it goes algebra, geometry, and then algebra 2.
Correct.
So one could say, I mean, I'm looking at, what concerns me about this is seen in 2015 geometry at 81.7%. My mind tells me the next year they're taking algebra 2 and it's 65.65%. Is that
Mhm.
some logical thinking there in
Yes.
terms of the course direction that they take?
Through the progression, yes.
So I respect that these came out at the end of the year and the staff has not had the opportunity to go through it. What is the timeline on that in terms of adjustments that potentially need to be made?
As soon as they start looking at it, once the school year starts, then the principals will start reaching out to us for whatever professional development needs or have been identified. So it will have to go very rapidly, as you would expect.
Okay.
And I have a question going back to slide, in the reading, elementary reading, back to slide 3. Explain again the spring benchmarking and, noticeably the lower percentages in those. If you can just explain what those are.
I can try.
Okay.
One of the things that we worked really hard on over the summer last year and then going into the school year was Mary and Aaron worked with our reading teachers to tighten up the alignment so that across the district and across a building, I don't know, I'm picking a magic letter here, letter M is proficient. So an M over here in this building matches what an M over here is and an M over here is.
Mhm.
One of the things that we were seeing is some discrepancy between the different levels, and a second grader could read an M and a fifth grader could read an M, but the way teachers were interpreting the M at those different grade levels was a little bit different also. So within the scope of all of that, there was a lot of work on inter-rater reliability, and part of my assumption here is that as we tighten that up, we had some teachers scoring things a little higher. You would think the opposite is true, but it may not have been. Teachers, especially in the spring, have had that student working with them. There's a little bit of the knowledge base where you give the student the benefit of a doubt, or you might not. That also in the past has played into high score in the spring and then a significant drop in student performance in the fall, where we're trying to clean up all of those pieces and get to that. So that's what I'm seeing at this point. But until I get some time to work with our coaches and our teachers to make sure that's what's going on, that's just a guess.
Okay, I just want to read it back. See
Yep.
if this is right. So these spring benchmarks are efforts to compare the 3 elementaries and kind of see if they're all in the
These
same
are
area.
from all 5 elementaries, so it's third graders across the district. The students are assessed by their individual teacher.
Right.
And so Dr. Ross assesses a student at an M. I assess a student who reads at the same level, and I say it's an N or an O.
Sure.
So we're trying to tighten that up.
Right. And that's why you're saying that these numbers look smaller, about 10% on average, or a little bit more in that slide and also in the next slide, comparatively, in 3 and
5%,
4.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but
And that's because of the differences between the
I
elementaries?
want to say yes.
Okay.
It's possible that as you're seeing kids move through the system, that a different grade came in and they had some more needs or something, especially when you look at a particular grade, you would expect to see that same trend in the FAST data, and we're not. That may be a reflection of other data points or other things that we've shifted since we've added FAST, we've shifted some of our instruction, and maybe we lost some ground somewhere else, and we need to get back to that. That's all conversations your teachers need to have with their principals.
Okay, thank you.
But I think one thing, you mentioned it, but just as a clarification, because I've experienced it, it's not even between elementaries, but you're tightening it up at one elementary so that K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're consistently benchmarking the kids on the same, that's where that rate of reliability.
It
So that your
includes from grade
child,
to grade.
and that's how, in some ways, our families may experience it, because your child ends a certain grade, we'll say second grade with an M, and then they start third grade and they're at a K, and you're saying, wait, what happened over the summer? So that's
Exactly.
another way that
Yep.
that's helping out.
Yep,
That's a good
we're
point.
hopeful.
Yeah.
But as a district, if we're going to, we are moving towards implementing this literacy plan across the district, and the full intention is for the program to be much more similar among our 5 buildings. Are you comfortable that all 5 buildings are stressing the inter-rater reliability at the same level at this time?
Not yet.
All
We're
right.
working on that. Because
Okay.
at this point in time, there's still some variance that we're working to tighten up at the district level. Absolutely.
All right.
Other questions, discussion? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next item, board committee reports. Any updates from what was provided?
One thing I might add for the board information is I did include some information there with Elisa's name behind it on the Ames Education Association meeting, that they are in the midst of a dual fundraising goal, one for new choir roads and the other one, which is yet to make its official public opening, as a campaign for raising money for new marching band uniforms at the same time. So the Ames Education Foundation is pretty busy, and they announced the Taste of Education for 2016 is set for September 25. Tickets are available at STAM and at the Ames High School, and just wanted to highlight that information from the Ames Education Foundation.
All right, anything else?
Teaching and Learning Committee, kind of, sort of, attended a workshop in DC to listen to, the fascinating part for me was listening to the research of John Hattie, just fascinating statistical breakdown of educational processes and the things that actually get effect and the things that don't. And you know, I can't wait to dig into this information more, because it seems like a lot of the items that we want to sit here and talk about and the states talk about and governmental bodies talk about are not the things that actually have any effect on children. And I think it's worthy of further discussion as time goes on, but it was just an eye-opening 8 hours of nonstop information. That was last Wednesday, and I enjoyed every moment of it. So.
More info to come as we synthesize all of it.
Yeah, it's a little too early to give you a true opinion of any thoughts and changes that may need to be coming, but we'll get there.
Great. All right, moving on to our consent items. I'll take a motion.
Move approval of the consent items with moving item number 6 to the action agenda, to an action item.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, second by Franson. Discussion. Dr. Taylor?
You have the minutes from the regular meeting held June 20th, 2016. Claims and payroll from Ms. Triss from June of 2016. Also, personnel report. We have several gifts to the district, including cash in the amount of $7,605.38 for the 15-16 school year from the Meeker PTO to Meeker. A cash in the amount of $6,669.50 for the 15-16 school year from the Edwards PTO to Edwards. 3 large boxes of school supplies from Ryan and Gail Gelling to the district. 5 boxes, one each for each elementary building of school supplies from the College of Agricultural Life Science Multicultural Programs to the district. And as you toured the building tonight, if you noticed in the inside of all of our window casings and all of our offices, John Hala Architects donated $4,266 worth of white oak window casings on the interior windows of all 27 windows in the district building. We do have several contracts. These are annual ones that come to the board for approval, including the agreement with ISU for the use of Vinker Memorial Golf Course for the boys and girls golf teams for this upcoming year, the agreement with ISU for the use of the cross-country course for a meet on September 1, the agreement with Youth and Shelter Services Rosedale Shelter in Heartland AEA 11, the agreement with RICO to extend the copier lease agreement on a month-to-month basis. A note there is that we are replacing 7 copiers with refurbished copiers, which reduces our annual bill by about $7,000. Kudos to Carl for that one. Update to the contract with CIC for changes on online registration software. We do have some continuous open enrollment applications. A receive and file the Teacher Leadership and Compensation Plan Annual Report. And I wanted to jump back to number 12 for a second and highlight that for our new board members, this is another annual appointment that is required by Iowa Code, and that is the appointment of what we call District Abuse Investigators. I am the primary investigator. Ms. Darcy also serves as the alternate in case it happens to be a gender issue. And we do undergo training every 5 years for this so that we do formal Chapter 102 child abuse investigations. I gave information to the board that I've been doing this for 25 years in the district, and I think I've done it 5 times as a grand total, which is, I'm going to knock on wood and hope that it stays that way. I also wanted to point out that if we find, Ms. Darcy or I find a accusation to be founded, it automatically can go to the police or it can go to a level 2 investigator. And we do have a level 2 investigator for appointment here, and it's Ms. Kathy Collins-Riley, who I think is going to be doing a very good job at this. She has a Juris Doctorate and served as an attorney and legal counsel for both the School Administrators of Iowa and for a long time with the Iowa Department of Education. So those names are up for reappointment on an annual basis in accordance with Iowa Code.
Any further discussion? All right, proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. First action item, take a motion.
I move to get it on the table. Item 6, the
why don't you do-
city council.
Oh, we can do that, that's
Right.
fine. Yeah, keep going, that's fine.
Okay. Move adoption of the city council, the minutes from the joint meeting with the city council on June 13th.
Second.
Okay.
Moved by Rossiter, second by Esposito.
And then I'd like to amend those. Very minor thing, but it clarifies something. In our discussions that we've had with the city and that evening, those that are in the swim community understand clearly that a 50-meter pool is for long course swimming, which is Olympic or done in the summer season. Our high school team swims in a 25-yard pool, and that is the short course season, or universities and colleges swim with a 25-yard pool. So what I would like to have amended in these minutes is the first 4 references to 25, where it says 25-meter, Kathy? But leave that 5th reference, because that 5th reference is in regards to something that Mr. Schenker said, and, you know, a warm water basin could be a 25-meter or 25-yard. But for high school's purposes, we would need a 25-yard pool, not meter.
Can you put that to me in writing so I can? Thank
I've
you.
got it highlighted and I can email it to
Thank
you.
you.
Yep.
Any other questions on that?
So is that why it's an action item, to clarify that?
Correct. And so that going forward, we can all use the right terminology, especially in the press. I've gotten a couple of phone calls from swim folks that said, wait a minute, you can't build a 25-meter pool for the high school. Yeah, so let's just get this clarified, what the difference is. And, you know, most people that aren't involved with swimming, like, you know, Mr. Rasmussen and I, don't realize that there is a difference, but there is.
So further clarification for those of us not in the competitive swim world, then the desire by the board to have a 50-meter competitive, then it would be 50 meters by 25 yards to accommodate the high school swim team.
Correct. Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
That work?
So do we want to act on these, or do we want to amend the language and make it actionable next time?
I was gonna say just amend it and then vote on it tonight, with the changes. All those in favor of the amended minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Passes 5-0. Going back, number 14, take a motion.
I move that the staff members appearing on the attached list be reappointed to their respective coaching and co-curricular assignments for the 2016-2017 school year.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, second by Rosser. Discussion. See none, proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 15.
I move the board approve the substitute rates of pay for the 2016-17 as presented.
Second.
Moved by Rosser, second by Rasmussen. Discussion.
Question to Dr. Taylor. We're raising this by just $5, is that correct?
Correct.
How does that compare, and does that put us at a disadvantage when we're going out looking for, you know, subs?
The $100 that it would raise us to on a daily basis, and just for those that are interested, and if anybody would like to have it, was actually supplied to me by the Ballard Community Schools, who's the substitute pay rates for last year, actually, the 2016 sub pay rates. And as I took a look at those at 95, you can see that the vast majority of schools, the range is from $125 a day down to $93. We were at 95, which is on the low end of that. I think by moving that up by $5 to $100 per day, it puts us in a little bit better position. I'm not exactly one of those that thinks that although I'm going to receive probably a couple emails on this one, we have about 5 or 6 days during the school year where we do not have enough subs that are available. I think what we're taking a look at with Dr. Ross and all of our other categorical funding is the amount of professional development that supports. Also puts a little bit of pressure on our number of subs that we have, but our sub list is well over 200. The advantage of being on the sub list is I don't think I want to work today. So when the phone rings, I'm not going to do it. So as I said, about 5 to 7 days during the school year, we come up short. Each building is prepared for that. And so we take care of that. Will it put us at a more competitive level? The metro schools are raising theirs as high as 130 or even more, and they are still having difficulties. And the thing that I was going to say that I might get in trouble is I think substitute teachers enjoy working in Ames. And because of that, it may not be as big a crisis as it has been traditionally across the state.
Okay.
But I think it makes us more competitive at 100.
Well, I hope it does. One of the things that I've, typically being a sub in a district and committing yourself as a sub to a particular district, because you get sometimes you're working multiple districts. Decide usually which one you're going to take, not just always, the first one that calls, because that's how you get your foot in the door as a teacher. And I hope we're not losing good teachers down the road because they're taken as in. Dr. Ross, do you want to maybe answer that?
Having been in that very position a good number of years ago, being that teacher who was subbing, and I actually subbed in 7 different school districts around the area. Ames, having resided in Ames at that point, that was my first choice. But I also was committed to, if Madrid had called me, I was driving to Madrid that day. But I also know that we have especially some of our retired teachers will sub in our district. They may be one of those 200 people on the sub list, but not all of them will sub in every building, in every classroom. They may be subbing for a particular individual, or I know of a couple that say, I want to sub at Sawyer because that's where I taught. So that's just one example. So it really, I'm not so concerned about losing folks to other districts because of $5 or $10 or $15, because there's the driving part of the element as well. It's really welcoming our subs and making them feel wanted when they come into the buildings, and making sure that in most of our buildings, our principals and our teachers are referencing them as guest teachers as opposed to substitutes. And I think that creates that welcoming environment that does more to bring a substitute teacher in than a few dollars here and there. To be honest, that's my observation professionally from both sides of the desk, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
I would guess,
But I think you make a good point, and you're exactly right. I know that our building principals, if they have a really good substitute teacher, especially a long-term one, they will include them in the interview pool almost every time. So it is a good way for especially mid-year graduates at Iowa State and other colleges to come in, and we do see a rise in the number of people that we have signed up for substitute teaching after the first of the year because of those mid-year graduates. And if they get into a long-term sub position, get themselves well known, we have hired many of those in the past. So that's a good point.
Thinking of it from those substitute teachers' standpoint, though, too, I mean, I don't think, and I was in that position, I know a few people that have been in that situation more recently, and you're wanting to meet as many administrators as possible, and so you don't care what school district is calling, and I'm guessing that a lot of those younger teachers that are just trying to get into the profession, they don't even ask what the pay is. They're not coming for the pay. They're coming to meet people. They need to be compensated fairly, and I'm not arguing that it should be lower in any way, but they're doing this to meet as many administrators as possible, make that connection so they can find the right administrator that sees their value, so they can get on with their chosen career. And there are other teachers, retired teachers, that pay may motivate them to actually say yes some days, but those teachers that are trying to get into a career are going to say yes no matter who calls if they don't have a position that day.
When I read this board action form, I thought, I didn't think we were at $100, but the language threw me off. So the rate for substitute teaching will not remain $100, it will rise to $100.
Rise to $100, correct. Sorry.
Any other discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 16.
Move the board approve open enrollment applications beginning with 2016-17 school year as presented.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, second by Franson. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. And item 17.
I move the board approve substantial completion of the Fellows Project by the following contractors: General Bid Package HBC LLC, Masonry Bid Package Jeff McTaggart Masonry LLC, Mechanical Bid Package Brockway Mechanical and Roofing Company, Inc., and Electrical Bid Package Van Manen Electric, Inc.
Second.
Moved by Esposito, second by Rosser. Discussion.
Steve, I assume this is for the building as opposed to the site development that's coming? So I think as a practical matter, what that means is we've gotten beneficial use, our stuff's in there, so it's time for us to release some retainage on that, but we'll probably still have some held back for the finishing of the site for probably not the masonry guy because he doesn't have anything there. I don't know, electrically and HPC will probably have a little bit, and maybe some mechanical, I don't know. Okay.
Any other discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Items of the board. I just would like to thank everyone coming out tonight, especially staff. It was a great reception we had for the ribbon cutting, and it's going to be a great facility long term. So it's great to have this new building here for our students and our staff and our administrators. That's really a testament to education in our community. I was very happy to hear a lot of positive comments from community members saying it's great you invested in this property. So it's always encouraging when you hopefully make the right decision. Comments?
I just wanted to clarify a couple comments earlier made by Ms. Stein in the public forum. The board did not meet, members of the board did not meet with the director, Dr. Deborah Reed from the Iowa Reading Research Center. It was our, pardon me, Dr. Ross, and then our two teachers on special assignment that are working with Dr. Ross. The two of them are taking the lead on the word study review. Those are the individuals that went and met with her, and that update is on the webpage where we are putting weekly updates on that lit plan review. So I just wanted to make sure that that clarification was out there, that meeting did take place, and it was our staff that did that.
And I think for the transparency part of that too, and to accommodate Dr. Reed's schedule, they traveled to Iowa City for that meeting because there were some people that had requested the ability to be present at that meeting when it occurred. But the meeting occurred at Dr. Reed's office, and so it was our three administrators that were in present.
And some staff.
I wanted to echo that about the ribbon cutting too. I was really pleased when the Northcrest bus pulled up. Dr. Rosser, you had a good influence on him. It was a pretty neat deal. As we begin to look forward beyond that, we do know that as we get into August, for instance, we'll be coming forward with the athletic budget, technology update, the exchange student report. I want to come back to the board and the meeting on August 8th with updated enrollment numbers so that you can see where we are relative to classes, especially at the elementary level. There are, of course, the start of school is coming up pretty quick. I wanted to let the board know that I have, in essence, partnered a little bit with Coach Campbell at Iowa State on what he has done at Toledo prior to coming to here is what he called Victory Day. And most of that work was done by Darcy Cousins anyway. So I can say I teamed up, but it was Darcy did the work. All I did was sign the letter that said I would support it. But when he was in Toledo, had a very successful program that he called Victory Day, where it was an opportunity for some special needs students to actually get out on the football field with the football players. And so we've joined in on that and have actually endorsed that a little bit. And Darcy has done some legwork here to help recruit some future football stars for Iowa State from our programs. I did put on the, kind of in conjunction with that, I did put in front of the board tonight what's known as a 2015-16 determinations letter from the Iowa Department of Education. And what it is that in accordance with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which was started in 2004, it's just a letter that we receive every year after they review our programs, especially our special needs programs, and it declares that we do meet the requirements of IDEA. In addition to that, I think the last thing that I would throw out for the board at this point is that we are headed into, I think, one of those time periods in the year where we begin our administrative retreat, always on the first weekend of August. And so we'll be having staff coming back as we begin to ramp up and get ourselves ready for the start of school coming up very soon. I wanted to thank the board again for their support on all of the projects that we've got going, and especially the members of the facility committee, Mike Esposette and Bill Talbot. Luke has been there most of the time too. That we actually set this facilities master plan in play in 2011, and since that time, every project that we had on that particular master plan, really with the oversight of the facilities committee, has met every deadline, and we'll be meeting the last two with the opening of Fellows and Sawyer coming up here in just a couple weeks. A lot of that credit also goes to Steve sitting in the audience and from TOK. But the other guy that I wanted to have a final word tonight was a lot of the work and logistical things that take place that people tend to miss out on is the work of Jerry Peters, who's trying to hide back there right now. I can see him. But that would be pretty natural for him. The last thing I would throw out, and I don't know if you want to ask Jerry any questions, but I'm going to say thanks, but he's pretty sure right at this point we got the water issue at Meeker solved with the replacement of what's known as a backflow preventer. And Jerry had to explain what that is, so now I can even do little hand things to tell you what a backflow preventer does. But it appears as though that was the place, and he's had 4 or 5 positive, not positive, it'd be negative. They've come back clean, so which is, we are right at that point of almost making a proclamation that we have clean water at Meeker. But Jerry spent an awful lot of time on that, and like you said, it was something that became personal, and he went after it and got it done. So thanks, Jerry, for all those nights and weekends you put in to get that accomplished, too.
All right, any other comments before we take a motion to go into closed session? All right, I'll take a motion to go into closed session, and if you could please read that whole thing.
I move that we go to closed session as provided in section 21.5.1 I of the open meetings law to evaluate the professional competency of an individual whose performance is being considered to prevent needless and irreparable injury to that individual's reputation, as that individual has requested a closed session.
Second.
Moved by Esposette, second by Franson. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Wants roll call? All right. Vote on roll call.
Franzen, aye.
Rosser, aye.
Rasmussen, aye.
Deardorff, aye.
Esposette, aye.
All right, we are in closed session.
And thanks to Carl and your staff for getting this boardroom ready to go tonight. We didn't want to overlook that one either, so. I'll get you to Cochran.
Yeah.
We are out of closed session. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Move adjourn.
Second?
Moved by Esposette, second by Rosser. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. We're adjourned.
So do we have to turn this off and I took care of it?